Hello and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks at all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me, as he does every week, is the guru of the paranormal world, researcher, lecturer, and investigator, Steve Mera. Steve, it's going to be a hell of a show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It's been, like I say, it's been a real busy day. I've just finished, I think, a 6 hour interview, and then literally got a cup of tea, and then I'm here. So it's always go, but it's always interesting, and this is an opportunity tonight to get some of the real good critical stuff out. And I say critical stuff, things are probably the highest importance about getting information out about these various subjects. Because obviously, we're not going to just add another stone to the mountain we've already got in theories. We need some, hard facts, and that is done through extensive research that my colleague Nathan's done, and myself, and some that you've done, and many others, which are coming to certain conclusions, and that's very, very interesting. It's going to pose, it's going to confuse people, I assure you, and it's going to be quite profound to try and wrap your head around. But once you actually peer into that darkness, it's always to say, pull back the veil a little bit, it all starts to make sense. And this is kind of where we are in this show. So it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah, it really is. Now, I mean,
Mm.
when we think about otherworldly visitors, I think a lot of people will automatically assume that whoever they are, they're coming here for the benefit of humanity. However, that isn't necessarily the case. Many people have voiced concerns that there could be a very dark side to all of this, and that's certainly the case with our very special guest tonight. That's paranormal researcher, investigator, and lecturer, and founder of Necronetics, which we're going to get into shortly, Mr. Nathaniel Gillis. Nathan, thank you very much for joining us. How are you doing, my man?
Doing good. Thank you for having me, gentlemen. It's a pleasure, and I'm excited to get to the depth of the research being done. It's not like I do a lot of shows, and it's not every day that I get this opportunity to collaborate with people who are doing the deeper research. So it's going to be interesting. I'm excited.
As are we, and certainly as am I. I think the best place to start, we'll delve right in, Nathan, is with Necronetics. I mean, tell us a
Yeah.
little bit about Necronetics. How did that come about? What's the agenda, for want of a better word, and how does that
Mhm.
fit into what we're about to discuss here tonight?
So essentially, the earliest model of the phenomenon I inherited was demonology. I grew up in an evangelical household. And so I got into the Nephilim, the Rephaim, and the whole Jewish mythology. And then after that, I started doing in-home investigations. And I'm thinking, okay, there's a problem here because a lot of these things are appearing or wanting to appear as demonic. And yet, when you look at their pathology, it's something completely different. And so that's when I started encountering case studies that had a unique, I guess, behavioral pattern. And that was possession and pregnancy being within the same cases. And so that's essentially researching incubi literature, incubi cases. And that's when I started collecting a data set that's very unique. And that was that these entities were sigilizing their victims and then using secretions at the same time. And that's when I realized, hold on a minute, this seems to be like an occult practitioner and not horns and hooves. And so that's when I started collecting the sigilizations and the sigils themselves. And unfortunately, I found them again in ceremonial and ritual magic, and specifically within the context of ancient necromancy, which was the springboard to a whole, I guess you could say, a deconstruction of my model of the phenomenon. I had to completely abandon all dogma and to embrace the data. And so I had to create, literally, I had to orchestrate an entirely new vocabulary to even articulate some of the findings. And so that's where I combined genetics with necromancy and created Necronetics. And thankfully, I guess that there's a lot of people coming forward, both sacred and secular, that are not only experiencers, but they're researchers and they're wanting something to sit under. Like, can you give me some context? Is this what I'm collecting? And that is necronetics. Now, the real interesting issue about necronetics is that it kind of employs or even researches hybridism throughout history. And so I started out with incubi cases, then I ended up with hybridism and ufology. And that's when I realized that these are merely masks of the same phenomenon. in that there is a deeper pathology at work that is perhaps more disturbing than a lot of people want to appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, Steve, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Because I mean, I've got, I know where I want to go, but you know, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's fascinating stuff.
Well, anybody who spent a considerable time in this subject, like Nathan and myself and others, that eventually you keep going to you cross a boundary. And once you know what you're talking about. Once you cross that boundary, you kind of the clues. You start to see the pattern. You start to see the mechanism at play, and sometimes the phenomena recognizes that the game's up. And sometimes it doesn't like that. And sometimes it becomes a difficult journey then once they are aware that you're onto them. And that difficult journey starts. And it's an uphill, it's two steps forward, one step back when it's doing this type of research. It's not always good for your health. It's not always good for your lifestyle because it can be implicated and changed and manipulated by phenomena to bring on problematics. I mean, if for instance, you want to cross a road, suddenly you'll have boulders there. Things will fall in your path to cause you to evade of where your path is taking you. And they will do that purposely to try and throw sabos in the works, as we say, called sabotage. And it's not easy. But a number of more researchers now coming on board, and they've had to. I have to say, and I say it for everybody who's realizing this, they put the time in, they put the years in, and they haven't let up. Many people jump off the bus half on its journey because they're comfortable there, and that's okay if you're comfortable there. For me, it's not. For me, I don't need another mountain of material to say, okay, this stuff exists. I don't need another photo. I don't need another video. It's beyond all that now. Otherwise we're just adding to stuff to the mountain we've already got already. We need answers. But to get those answers, you've got to make a decision. And that decision is a very vigorous path, one that will be you'll be challenged upon. And if you're prepared to do so in the goodness of research and wanting to develop an understanding of the complexities behind this mechanism, then it can be costly, but at the same time, it can be very rewarding to try and get that information out because we see the necessity and probably one of the most important issues that we're faced with, mankind today is faced with, is the truth behind the phenomena. And this is a massive, massive charade which people are playing with, plugging in, maximizing on stuff, and they're part of the problem because this is what the phenomenon is doing. And so I think it's going to be really interesting when we start to reveal the things that are going on, which you recognize as a mechanism behind it, and how they're doing it, and why they're doing it, and how easily and unfortunately we are manipulated by phenomena.
I mean,
Very
it's
much so.
fascinating stuff. I mean, Nathan, you both mentioned there the phenomena, and you both mentioned, that it's obviously intelligent. It manifests in different ways, and it's been here for thousands of years. Seemingly as long as humanity has. Now, there's been loads of theories, as you said in the past, things such as ancient aliens, and it seems to be much more nuanced than that, though. It seems to be much more layered and complex. I mean, what can you tell us about the phenomena, how you understand it, how long has it been here, and why? I mean, why is it here? What does it want?
So my first approach was looking at it through the lens of parasitism and aggressive mimicry as a species that, in order to manipulate our perceptions of it, it would kind of blend in with reality, or when triggered, would incarnate an archetype. And we're seeing that in the pathology. So, specifically speaking, in incubi literature, there was this weaponization of perception employed where this is incredible. It's fascinating to me. I was talking to Steve the other day. I was like, you've got to hear this. If I'm right, like if we're right, obviously it was your idea first. But anyway, so I started realizing that these experiencers were perceiving the phenomenon differently based upon if it was peripheral or if it had connected to their consciousness. Over and over again, it was replete. It was a behavioral pattern that was confirming all of the evidence. And so I began to have cases like that where one experiencer was in bed with her husband and an entity manifested to her left. It looked just like her husband. The physiognomy was pristine, very correct. And so they copulate. And before the copulation, she's induced. And Steve, you're going to know what I'm talking about now. Induced into this trance-like state. And this entity is not just manifesting to her, but in a way it's manifesting through her. And this interface event takes place. After the copulation, it moves to her side. The trance state is lifted, and the phenomenon had been literally holding back her memories to where she even told me, she said, Nathaniel, it made no sense, but she goes, I realized that my husband was next to me the whole time. And so what people don't realize again is that we're not fighting for hours of consent. We're fighting for mere seconds before that entity and the proto-intelligence itself has the ability to initiate the observer effect, which we'll get into, and start to think for the experiencer. Now, what that means is because we've made that connection, now we have to question every interface event and how much of that is not self-initiated, like CE5 says, but is an entity-initiated interfacing event where the phenomenon seeks to be seen by us. Once we observe it, it incarnates an archetype, and quite literally, we're fighting for mere seconds. Anything after that, and here's the data set, can easily be misremembered, manipulated, and in most cases, we have to do memory regression on these experiencers just to figure out what occurred. And so that's when I realized like this is it's a lot deeper than okay, it's just UFOs and ghosts because there's a difference between what the entity actually is most of the time and what it's interfacing with. Now, once I made that connection, I started getting into Lloyd Auerbach's work and apparitional theory, which also further deconstructed my model. I'm like, what is going on? Because my understanding of this is that is a singular intelligence that's diversifying its identity in our eyes. The pathology is always the same. It's always there. It's just the fact that it will like to recontextualize itself, right? Like for instance, yeah, I'm an alien, but I would like an altar. Just give me an altar. And so when I started looking at this, I started realizing that like with Lloyd Auerbach, he was doing an investigation and they kept seeing the same apparition. And so the phenomenon was interfacing with him as an archetype. But then when they went to go to the camera, they realized the apparition was never captured. It was just a ball of light, in that the ball of light had been projecting an apparition, and they could only see one, but not the other. Then I started getting, this is some of my latest research that has been the most expensive, right? Personally, is that now we're seeing the same phenomenon and the same pathology within CE5, where what they're witnessing with with the observer effect and with their eyes is completely different than what they're capturing on camera, which means that it's the same thing. It's the same triggering of the observer effect. It's the same weaponization of our perception. And you wouldn't believe the conversations I've been having with practitioners of CE5, where it's like not even just the hitchhiker effect, where the entity that they think they're observing follows them back to their home. And now you see the real nature of the phenomenon as it diverse. Oh, now I'm here.
Yep.
Shadow figures, poltergeist activity. And so that's really where I'm at. But I guess what I'm saying here, guys, is that we're not fighting for minutes. In many cases, we're fighting for seconds. And within that time frame, we have to make a decision. What is this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, humanity wants to always put things in boxes. It's just a format of how science works is building blocks, really is. And we have this problem of putting everything in a box and giving it a name. And because we do things and we're all so systematic in our mental approach to dealing with trying to understand science, is that it's been identified and recognized by the phenomena to build narratives. Those narratives are being pushed more and more and more today and will lead people down the opposing path because they don't want to give up the good stuff. They don't want to give up the information, the secrets. They don't want you to know what's behind the veil, behind the mask. I don't know if you've ever really truly ever seen the true face of this phenomena. Whatever this source is, what's responsible is incredible. An incredible godly powered source, in a sense of speaking. But that can be very, very misleading. And the problem is that these new narratives, they're coming from here, they're coming from there, it's this, that, and the other. You guarantee that, if the popular narratives, they are farthest from the truth, because they are exceptional at hyperlucidity. Really, really. They know how to manipulate. I mean, of course, when Nathan's talking about perception alteration, masters, absolute masters. And not only that now is that, this isn't no theory, it's scientific evidence now to point that, as soon as we encounter this phenomena, and you can term it many different things depending on how it wants you to perceive it, of course, is that it is totally manipulative of us, our condition, our biological systems, everything. And of course, the psychology of that is that the brain can be easily affected very, very quickly. I think we've got it measured at about 20 seconds now with some of the work that Barry Fitzgerald's done, initiated experiences there. And of course, you don't realize for the average observer who's out there and having an experience, they're unaware that they're being manipulated. They're unaware that suddenly this phenomenon just grabbed a hold of your psychology, your psychosis here, and it's going to manipulate your brainwave activity. It's going to put you into a state where you are more easily acceptable to perception alteration. And that is a certain type of brain state. And that is what it's going to do. It's not normal to be in that brain state in a normal waking process, but that will do. It will prep you ready for the internet, for the contact, for what it wants to do. And it basically, once it's got control, it's basically that, we think we're crazy. Human beings who just think we're in control of everything. We know everything. We are nothing. We're absolutely to this thing. And we think we might be able to get a head start on these. Absolutely no way. We are built and machined wise in a certain way. And it's very profound how humanity, Homo sapien point two, you could say, has been constructed because we have been constructed and evolved to be a sponge, which basically is designed to soak up all that stuff they do. And that's how easily we are designed. We are designed to be manipulated by this phenomenon. It's like a glove fitting a hand, is as simple as that. So let's not kid ourselves that we're going to get ahead of the game because they are already light years ahead of the game and know what we think, know what we're going to do sometimes even before we're going to do it, know future events, know how to change our perceptions, how to force things upon us, and totally manipulate to the point that they will get absolutely everything that we want. So we can't fool ourselves. So those on the inside, those that have spent years of research, realize that it's a lot easier to bow your head in a worship position to these things than to oppose, because sometimes opposing comes at a cost.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
it's interesting listening to you there, Steve. I mean, Nathan, I'd like to go back to 2 points that should have brought up between the both of you there. You were talking about perception alteration, how we perceive the phenomena. And my research is not by no way as far along as yours, but I've kind of, come to the conclusions that, like you say, how we perceive the phenomenon is how we perceive the world and reality in general. And I think this has been the case throughout history. For example, Men in Black encounters in the Middle Ages described like a man that's wearing complete black, like a priest, and not a man in a suit. So to me, this phenomenon is presenting itself of the times. So do you think, you can look at examples of history like that and say, well, that's the phenomenon that's interacting with humanity. And also, you spoke about, a woman who believes she was copulating with her husband. There's ancient legends from Greece, for example, of Zeus doing the exact same thing. And again, I kind of think, folklore and creation stories, you can pull kernels of truth in that. So, what are your thoughts on that? And is this power ultimately, is it still here? Well, it is still here today, but is it still manipulating us today as it was thousands of years ago through puppet kings and puppet leaders, or is it a much more discreet manipulation?
Yes, and dare I say this, hope it'll get canceled through puppet researchers too, you know. Let me go back and say this, my friends. In the 1970s, there were a series of murders that took place, and there were various academics and scientists that were approaching the phenomenon as if these were extraterrestrials. And each and every time they would come out with their thesis, the night before, they would be found deceased in a desert over and over and over again. And the families were obviously devastated at the loss, but they were more curious as to what's going on, right? My husband would have never done this. He's an academic. He was working on this master thesis about the phenomenon. It's his life's work. And next thing you know, they're gone. And there was one individual named Professor Rene Hardy who was an inventor. He had over 250 patents, and he was also approaching the phenomenon as if it was extraterrestrial. But just like all of the other preceding scientists, he broke through, which Steve and I have been mentioning, right? When you break through the bubble and see beyond the veil, the phenomenon self-corrects. It makes eye contact with you. And yeah, so next thing you know, guess what happened? He's found deceased. Now, it's important because this is the control mechanism that Jacques Vallée mentions in his book, where the family goes to the funeral. Everybody knows each other. They're talking to people. We don't know what happened, but we know it wasn't what it appears to be. As they're sitting down at the right before it starts, six very tall men. Now this gets to the point, right, of what we're dealing with. Very, very tall, skinny men walk in together in unison, sit down. They were photographed, they were spoken to, but nobody knew who they were. The end of the night, the family goes back and looks at the camera. They were never caught on camera. That's the kind of intelligence we're talking about, something that literally can create a physiological construct right in front of you. We're thinking, like, at least I, for like beginning of my career, I'm like, well, yeah, I get it. They can wear a mask. And then, no, we're talking about something that employs aggressive and at times parasitic mimicry to fabricate portions of reality right in front of us. And it is disturbing because I don't have a vocabulary to quantify that. But I can tell you this, and I've spoke to Stephen Barry about this in times past, where, if you get too deep in the research, the phenomenon pushes back. And so just recently, I was doing just researching the observer effect and the weaponization of it all, CE5 movement, and I felt it. You know it when you feel it. And I started reaching out to people, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't know what I just stumbled on. That's why I called you, Steve. I was like, if this is right, it's going to be bad, right? And so next thing I know, yeah, I have a dream, and in the dream, I was in a car with two men, and I opened up an envelope that said that I had cancer. And so what's unique about that, though, is I kept feeling this attachment, if you will. It's the only way I can explain it. The feeling of being watched and this pervasive presence. And so I went to bed with it, woke up with it for a few days, didn't know what was going on, like in terms of me physically. I'm like, I hope they didn't give me cancer or something. Anyways, so my family were on our way to go out to eat. And out of nowhere, we still can't determine where the car comes from, but it hits us head on at 70 miles an hour. Police don't know where it came from. It's weird. So I'm not saying it just materialized. My point here is that, yes, when you get too close to the phenomenon, you start talking about subjects it does not want spoken about. You better watch your back. And this is another implication that this is not all love and light, that there are portions of the research that it's sensitive about and it's willing to go out of its way to correct.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of this stuff developed experiences through them or it,
Yeah.
because we really don't, that wants to progress us,
Mm.
certainly in the technological sense. I mean, they've certainly lent a hand to a lot of our technology, getting us to a certain place. The problem of that is that they don't want to develop our psyche. They don't want us to do. They don't want us to be pretty
No,
smart that way. They want to
no.
keep us exactly where we are because we're so easily manipulated. So we are tools to them. I mean, just like a piece of equipment in some cases, and it's
Mhm.
demonstrated that many, many times through manipulation of thought you heard something, thought you saw something, did you get touched? There's lots of, there's reasons behind everything. But there is a very clever mechanism behind a lot of it. Some of it is even has a mathematical basis to it. So we're dealing with something which is profoundly intelligent to the point where we've got to come up with new ideas about how we're going to deal with this because they've also set up the things that people thought that was the right way to deal with this. They're responsible for setting it up because it takes you in the wrong direction. This is the biggest problem. It's we think we might be doing the right thing when in fact we're doing exactly what they want us to do, and trying to get ahead of the game is not necessarily you might ever achieve that, but there are ways of being able to identify it. And once you do, like Nathan's saying, is that they don't like it. And there is a hierarchy, definitely a hierarchy, because I know that some of them have trouble dealing with some of the things that we placed to cause them problems. And some of them have been left there and not been able to, be able to carry on doing what they're doing. However, they can seemingly send the big boys out. And when the big boys out, none of that's going to help you. And I really have not found anything to be able to um, stop the big boys coming out. Do you know what I mean? And that's happened a couple of times to us because we've really pissed them off, to be honest with you. And we shouldn't have. We did too much, too soon. And that's the problem. Don't catch the eye of this phenomena. Go about your business, go discreetly, gather your information, your understanding. But what you don't go hell for leather because you're going to catch their eye. And once you do that, they're going to put what I refer to as a target there. You're going to be target watched. So you're going to be you're going to be watched, so monitored. And if you do step out of line, they'll let you know. And they do let you know. And it's not a nice experience. If you really want to persist with that, they won't go through you. They'll go through everything you care about around you, your loved ones, your family, your friends. And if that isn't bad enough, they'll make every feasible bad thing happen in your life to the point where the inconsistency of so many influential bad experiences happen which are so beyond coincidence will take place because they can even we even change the reality in a sense of speaking of your perception of reality because we all perceive reality in a certain way, but what I'm saying is that they can influence it so that you're having a living nightmare. So the problem is be able to very curvy path of avoiding the eye but getting to where you need to be, which is a very tricky situation.
It's on the knife's edge, right? And this is something that I've had to learn and mature into, And again, it's another thing that you and Barry and I have spoken about, right? Where I was told, like, don't shine so bright where they can see you. And the temptation is to be the best researcher you can and do the best work you possibly can and get something, a nugget of truth in all the darkness. And at the same time, it's like I've got it. And I run away at that point, Steve. Like I've got it. I'm not going to be seen again for a week because it's again the phenomenon will surface. Now, in addition to what you're saying, though, and this gets back to being targeted. I've also caught the phenomenon masquerading as one entity and baiting interactions with researchers. It's so funny because once I started seeing beyond the masks and the archetypes, I started dealing with scarifications on bodies and stuff. And I had this one host of a radio show, fascinating conversation. But he's like, Nathaniel, he goes, but I've been doing, he's like, I'm a host of a paranormal show. I've been doing this research for 30 years. And he goes, I'm starting to see something. I said, what are you seeing? Like, well, what you got? He's like, well, he goes, I was in a really malevolent haunting a while ago. And we kept seeing 666 and, three scratches on bodies. And everybody pretty much agreed that we were dealing with the demonic and its horns and hooves. He's like, so what we decided to do is call the local exorcist, and he shows up. Now it's right, guns are out, guns are blazing, we're going to go to battle. The only problem is the exorcist put out a vial of holy water in the most active room, and the alleged demon siphoned all of the holy water out of the vial in front of their eyes slowly. And at the end of that investigation, that priest went home thinking, I have no idea what that is. And so that is another pathology of the phenomenon. It's not just the incubus, right, that wears the mask of the husband. And then at the end of it, here I really am. Now we're dealing with the phenomenon, quite literally baiting people into interaction and then showing them its teeth. And at that point, they're not prepared for it. I'm not saying I am either. All I'm saying is there's something else out there that refuses to be defined. If we do come up with vocabulary to articulate it, it transcends all of that. And in a way, it does seem to be evolving according to our awareness of it, to where by the time we acknowledge what this is, it's 5 steps ahead of us, looking back. And so, but Steve's right, it's any kind of little nuggets we get. Thank you very much for letting me survive this. I'm going to go back to just eating chicken wings and watching football. I'll be back later to carry on the conversation because, people get hurt. And here's, I guess, my point is it's always the conversations it doesn't want us to have that brings about the best research, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating stuff. And like you say, there's numerous people that you can look at that we could spend an entire
Mhm.
episode who have met an untimely end, shall we say. I mean, it's tempting to think if you were just scratching the surface of this stuff, that the phenomena and the so-called elite who rule the world, for want of a better phrase, are kind of like in cahoots, if you like. But it occurs to me that that's not necessarily the case. Again, it seems to be a little bit more nuanced that there's a reason why society says that paranormal research is nonsense and that this doesn't exist and aliens don't exist. Uh, and it's almost as if, as you say, because the powers that be, whoever they are, don't want us to realize the potential of this stuff and the power of this stuff. Almost that they use it for their own ends and they want to hog on to it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Is there any like legitimacy in such theories and speculations?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And there's a measure of ufology that is product placement on the part of the phenomenon. When Matthew Roberts witnessed the gimbal UAP had a unique reaction. This has always blown my mind because, again, this is something people refuse to talk about. He goes home and a voice comes to him, starts pointing him back to books from occult authors, gives him details. And then a succubus comes to him. And in his words, not mine, I felt like I was being initiated. So a lot of this is the initiate period from my perspective, seems to be something that will initiate people. And it's not all that great. But with respect to the government, absolutely, and this is some of the darker research being done, is that, yeah, there are people within the three-letter agencies that are willing to fall on their own swords and become servile and just literally bow down to whatever these things are. And the problem that we're having is that the phenomenon's not refusing the worship. It's thank you. I really appreciate that, right? And what I'm noticing now, and I'm telling you, I can't really go into it on here, but I'm having conversations with people that are in ufology, that are big time in ufology. And what they're realizing is the same thing Albert Bender did when he built his altar, right? I thought these were extraterrestrials. And then he realized, oh my God, there's something deeper here. that's masquerading as these different archetypes. And so absolutely is initiation and that's what they're realizing. Like I was literally told to my face that Nathaniel, what you're lecturing on is not like a figment of your imagination. There are ufologists that you'll go into their homes and they will have altars. They'll tell you they're extraterrestrial shows and then go build an altar in their homes. And for me, the background in demonology, again, I don't appeal to that model of the phenomenon, but there does seem to be not just a conscious connection, but a sharing of currency here. And now I'm looking at it, my perspective is I'm not really worried about the technology. I'm worried about what they want in return. That, my friends, from my perspective, is really, really interesting to me. And once you get into that behavioral pattern, it hasn't changed ever. It's the same thing. Matter of fact, I did a lecture yesterday and I was talking about in biblical antiquity, they had a word for this. It was Sheol. And the phenomenon had actually guided practitioners underneath the cosmology of stars in deserts. Build me something. Here's the phenomenon. Build me something. And through that conscious connection, there was again the furthering of the incarnation. And with that said, the phenomenon's not changing its pathology, it's just changing the archetype. Everything else remains the same. This is why hybridism is all over the place, because it's the phenomenon. And so I guess what I'm saying here, guys, is in preaching to the choir here, obviously, but again, pull the mask off, sit down, and have an honest conversation with it. What are they wanting? Is it possible, and I'm just throwing this out there, is it possible that some of the sigilizations or the bio-sigilizations we're witnessing on experiencers are not accidents? They're not psychosomatic. These are rituals. And I've got it down to this, if I may, because I don't want to ramble, guys. You know me.
Okay.
Now I'm looking at Gen sorcery because Dr. Color Turner's her latest research prior to passing, she had individuals who were being not abducted, but like corpuscular balls of light begin to hover over them at night, and they would wake up with sigils from head to toe. And they were burned onto them. And so these experiencers would go to the ER and then have to have a heated blanket on top of them to help with the pain. Now, you take that and you look at what Diana Walsh Basuka saying, that some CE5 events are leaving people with burns on their bodies. Now, this is a religious scholar saying this. She said, and I went home after looking at the photographs. I went home and prayed. So I'm not suggesting they're demonic. I don't believe that at all. I believe that there is a measure of ritual magic present, and that some of this is initiation to where the phenomenon will place its product. And then I want that right now. Okay, come a little closer, my friend. This is what we require. And whatever that is, beyond all of the archetypes, that's the truest aspect of its source.
Absolutely. I mean, they're really good at what they do. That's the bottom line. You can't.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Incredible. And, to design methods of deception is endless. It's endless. I mean, it can do it on the spot and it sums you up and think, oh, that doesn't work that way. Okay, what about this way? And if that doesn't, oh, what about this way? Eventually, they will find somewhere within you where you have a soft spot for manipulation and it will devise it. And this is why we have so much diversity in this subject. It's not that it's diversity, it's just a figuring out different ways to deal with different people. People are different, they think
Absolutely.
different, grow up different, they have spiritual beliefs, some don't have any beliefs, and cultural differences apart from that. So, they're always going to be manipulated to the individual and see how best to manipulate individual is. And this is why sometimes the system does get it wrong. Occasionally, don't make mistakes often because these are clever and they evolve. If it makes a mistake, next time it comes back, it won't make that mistake again. So we've got to be forever changing. But the problem is, humanity isn't. We're pretty stagnant. We go through our lives with these set things in our minds about this is the way it should be. That's not changed. That's pretty much, stagnant. So we're easily manipulated because we're not phasing, not changing, and causing them to make these changes so often. Occasionally they get it wrong. Sometimes they'll be perceived something, which, oh, it must be an advanced craft from some other world that's just landed. It's got portholes and rivets on, and you think to yourself, well, they didn't quite
Yeah.
right there. But you know what? They won't do it next time, because if you recognize it, that's a bit odd. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Then they know that you recognize that, and they will not deliver it a second time. They evolve very, very quickly, and they have done for millennia. They've always been in. It's not new, new thing. It's just derived. But they had these locations, and they kid us into thinking you've got, it's ascension points. There's these places all around the planet, and you've got to climb the highest mountain, like Mount Olympus, or you've got to go to the top of the mountain where the Nephilim came down, or you've got to go to the holy caves of India up in there, because what was seen there, well, they were non-human deity. That's what they're not human. Do they get prayed to? By the multiple thousands every day. Who are they praying to? And it goes on and on. And, all the stories and the lies and things. Don't get me wrong, the people at the highest level know this, including the Vatican. Do you think it by chance that the acronym for the instruments used in their main telescope, which is called Lucifer, actually spells out the name Lucifer? That's the equipment, long names. Oh, just by chance it makes that list? No, everything's done for a reason, because they know, just like everybody else, you cannot fully oppose it. You can manipulate it. And if you manipulate it, you can get what you want, you can get what you will, but you've got to use it a little bit and accept it a little bit. You've got to reward it, you've got to honor it, you've got to show homage to it sometimes. And they're still doing it in modern times. They're still doing it even in the rocket industry. They're not going to let you know, me know. Launches are going up nearly every other day. I don't see them all. I only see the main ones. You're not going to see the ones with the sigils on. You're not going to see the ones with the, the
There we go.
visuals and things. Why do they want to do it? Because it breeds success into the mission. It means that nothing's going to go wrong. It's going to be successful. They're going to gain wealth from this. It's going to be successful. But you've got to damn well make sure you pay homage to the sponsors that gave you the information in the first place to get to the stars. That's how it kind of works. This is what's going on around us. And it's happening all over the world in a very, very secretive way.
It shows us where we are in this. I
Really?
mean, like I've had a lot of conversations, even with pastors and evangelicalism, and they're thinking, okay, we're 100 years off. Like it's like, no, 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 no. Right? It's whatever this is. Again, it will kind of make us in its own image, and that's what's so crazy about this, And I wish it wasn't like that. I wish it was actually. Can you imagine that? Hold on. Even if it was demonic, just take 2 vials of holy water, call me in the morning, we're good to go. But unfortunately, yeah, they transcend space-time. And again, looking at the pathology, what do they require? And I'll tell you the strangest aspect of it all is what would want to be worshipped like that? Like, what are we dealing with? A psychopath, a narcissist, some kind of species that, the only thing that comes to my mind, and this is an awful reference because it's not very sophisticated, is Nosferatu when he demanded worship. If you guys have watched the movie, he said, you shall address me as Lord, because what does he say? My lineage or my pedigree or something. Something weird like that. And I think that's always been the argument throughout history.
Yeah.
Was what would want, like, what moniker could we put on an entity that demands servitude, demands worship, demands even sometimes in some of the darkest aspects, sacrifices. And what is that? It's not ET phone home. It's something extremely sinister, and at the end of the day, the probably the most intelligent
Oh, yeah.
species out there, where it's unbearable at times. But I think that's where at least my research is, looking at the pathologies. I'm tired. It's like Steve said, I'm tired of going through the motions of asking the same questions. And I think in order for us to push the narrative forward, we have to ask first the right questions.
Yeah,
Right, it's
I
very,
mean, it's absolutely. I completely agree. Like you say, you can't just keep going over the same old stuff again and again. I think it's interesting as well that you talk about ritual, homage, sacrifice. And also when we just remind ourselves that this phenomenon, whatever it is, it reminds me of ancient legends once more, of like, that humankind will not look on my image, will not make an image of me, all those kind of things which kind of start to resonate. Um, what I think would be with ritual and homage and sacrifice in mind, I think it'd be a great time to speak about gifting. Now, I'm not completely au fait with what this is. I'll be honest with you, Nathan. So feel free to really get into this. How does that fit into all this that we've been speaking about here?
Well, at least some of the cases I've worked on, specifically with young people, it's like they have the ability to see it, or the phenomenon wants to be seen by them. And a lot of these cases, some of them are haunted, like they have really bad attachments, and then later on they become researchers. I was one of them. Paul St. Clair was one of them, right? Where it's like you're young and you're experiencing things. Steve, I was thinking about this the other day. Because Steve has lectured many times on direct voice phenomenon. I was experiencing that at 8 years old, and I had no idea what it was. It was
No.
very weird. I mean, literally waking up and I would hear a full-blown conversation going on above my head.
Yeah, I mean, of course, we know that,
Man. Yeah.
that we know that he transcends space and time. It does. So, and the problem of that is that when we gain enough evidence to support the fact that they are aware of future events, they are. We've got 6 documented, very well documented accounts of that to the minute. And you have to say, okay, where's your free will gone? And how did he know this? And no matter what circumstances you might try and purposely alter, such as tomorrow I'm going to take a left turn instead of a right, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's all calculated in on the conclusion. So, in other words, if you did and it did change, they knew you were going to do that, so you still reached the conclusion. So the problem is with this, if that is the case, how do we even deal with that? If they're aware of incidents that can alter a path and they can manipulate. Now, I believe initiated experiences do happen, sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes they might like us lecturing to 10,000, 5,000, 4,000 people because they want the word out because they've got a big ego. That's one thing. It's
There,
very thing. That's one
there
thing
we
we know.
go.
They've got ego, right? And they love it and they love the worship, and in any shape or form. In fact, when we talk about Jack Parsons and what did he have to do to gain that advanced knowledge, aeronautical knowledge and rocket science knowledge? He'd go straight back in the following day and build it when they gave him the bits and bobs because they helped us get to the stars. Well, do you know what? When with his scribe on Hubbard, it was all very occult like until they eventually got punched through the spiritual stuff, got into the poltergeist, punched through that, and then eventually NHI. And when it got to that, it was simple. These are the coordinates you go to out in the Mojave Desert. What do we want in return? Blood sacrifice. Don't we hear that over and over again? That the gods blood sacrifice. It's just a typical scenario. Because the blood sacrifice, he had to take actually some blood of his own in the vial and take it out there to the coordinates, and boy, was he rewarded. Absolutely, he was rewarded. It's happening today in a slightly different manner, but it's happening today just as it was back then. There are methods of gaining certain things. Now, it's not just about the technology, because everything's about weaponizing these days, or it's either weaponizing or getting rich, one of the two, you know, and it's employable for both of those things, unfortunately, but the problem has it is that we're still monkeys behind the steering wheel. You know, they want to keep us monkeys. They're not going to suddenly give us this super duper intelligence to understand it all, because the more you do with that, the easier it is to connect the dots. And they don't want that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the whole problem here. It's like, okay, yeah, as we evolve, they're evolving according to our awareness of it. And at some point, and this is kind of just to be very transparent here, at one point in my research, I'm going, am I a character in someone else's story? You know what I mean? Like, what is this all about? But that's really, I'll tell you what, I can like usually I can talk to people that are doing the research within about 15 minutes, see where they're at, see if they've, have you seen beyond the archetypes? Do what's really going on here? But at the end of the day, it is us asking, like, why do you want this? Why do you want that in return? And it points to a primeval intelligence that's been here since antiquity, probably even before. And for whatever reason, it does, and it perhaps consciousness is currency. I don't know. But one thing is that worship in veneration has always been there. Even with the Katamua inscription that's in Curly Expedition in '05, archaeologists uncovered a sarcophagus where an entity was telling people that it was his soul that needed all of these sacrifices.
Mm,
So if we look at the pattern of manipulation,
yes,
okay, yeah, there are ancestors until they're not.
that's right. He didn't just spring to life one day. Somebody think,
No,
oh, I might worship this thing. No, I'll tell you what happened. They were instructed to do it.
absolutely. Here's the
Oh,
download.
that's right. You worship me, and then you empower it. And then once you do that, of course, that's the downslide. And then that's a problematic, no matter what culture, no matter what country, it is the same story. Back in time, exactly the same process. Manipulation, worship, blood sacrifice, anything, because they want empowerment. They've got a huge ego, they want it. So that it's rewarding for them. So I would say, look, you know what? You even have to question everything, and it's a very difficult subject because you
Hmm.
cannot ignore religion. It's a mess.
There we go.
And
There
the
we go.
problem, the problem is that even some of them are designed to get you into the path of thinking. I mean, dare I say, even go as far as to say, even the word God has been hijacked by the phenomena. Dare I say it? But yes, in many different ways, because they have godly power, we're going to see it as, oh, it must be God, you know. But then
Oh,
the problem
yes.
is that when it doesn't look like God and it doesn't look like angels, you can damn well better, agree that the Vatican will make it so. The Vatican will say, oh, no, 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 we can't have small grey aliens sticking things in our people and our nuns and monks and things. It's got to be angelic. Turn it into an angel, turn it into a cupid, turn it into a cherub. I mean, you got to get that message forward. And now what do we see? Oh, well, they're changing the referencing. Yeah, because it's all about symbolism. Oh, well, now it's become the dove, the partridge. It's the Holy Spirit. You must let it in. Well, I say, you know what? I don't let anything in, because you don't know what it is at the end of the day. And nobody should be actually be given that advice, to be honest with you. You know, but no, isn't it? But the thing is, at the end of the day, you look through all the different various religions and it's setting you up to fail. It really is. That's the problem. Even
Yeah,
me, it's even manipulated the religions.
I mean, it's
And
fascinating stuff to do with religion. And you mentioned the Vatican there, Steve. I mean, Nathan, I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well, actually, because it's no secret that the Vatican and the Vatican archives, they've got, you can only imagine what they've got in there and what they know. And they've also been at the forefront of some, space exploration, certainly of recent years with their own observatories and things of that nature. So again, I mean, what part do the Vatican actually play in all of this, in your opinion?
it's it's the Jesuits. Malachi Martin, a long time ago, hit the nail on the head. That's why they hated him, is because he came out and said, listen, there is a strain of Jesuits that are actually practitioners of the occult. Now, back to what Steve was saying, because this is really profound. We're getting to a very, very important point here, is that not only can we not trust the entity's interface, we cannot trust their messages. And so what's happened is that now the message is validated by the miraculous. It's the manifestation propping up the validity of the message. And so it's literally making profits out of people. And there are some that I won't mention, but I mean, so much so where like anybody with a rational mind would be like, yeah, that's a lie. But then what happens is they caught phenomenon on camera. So what he says or what they said to him has to be true. We had witnesses that watched this. And so again, the phenomenon will often, again, it'll validate its message. Literally, this is going to happen. This is who I am through manifestation of the miraculous. And people get hoodwinked into that, not realizing it's just phenomenon. It's just phenomenon. We test it. Again, I mean, even the archetypes, right? You can't be Mother Mary and Hathor. You can't be. Both of those were separate people, had separate teachings. And so that's where I'm at with it all. It's like, oh my God, like once you start to see the manipulation at the root, um, here in the future, the research is going to start to show how profound it is. that some of these symbols were not understood as symbols because they were sigils, and that some of these were rituals being performed on experiencers without their knowledge, and guess what? Without their consent. And it's that's the root of it. People don't want to have those conversations. They know it's existing, they know it's happened. But and I think that they do that for one of many reasons, but more than anything else, it's because they know that once they start touching on that aspect, right, the phenomenon's going to push back. And I'm not talking about losing conferences. I'm talking about incarnating in your house.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, let's have a conversation, right? Okay, you thought you're big and bad. Let me show you what I just did. And at that point, I think they realize, like, I don't want to pay that price. But that's where I think that the research is heading, and it's going to be a very perilous time
Well, it
because
isn't easier, is it? Because
you
we
know,
know that sometimes they'll send out the minions, and the minions we kind of know how to deal with because we deal with them so regularly. And we have a process of dealing with that and without catching the eye too often. So we kind of steer our way through, that procedure. However, you still overstep and catch the eye, then sometimes they might send big boy out. And when they send the big boy out, the things that deal with the minions, forget it. It don't matter. It don't matter what protection you've got around. It might work with the little minions, but not with these guys. And that's a problem. And we've found ourselves, myself and Barry, on the end, the rough end of the stick there, on this, because of the research that we've done. And, we both got punished for it. And it is like a slap on the hand. So behave yourself, you know. I mean, we have to reel it back a bit then. Slow down. It's very easy to get excited when you're on the path, isn't it? You got that knowledge, you got to, oh God, I want to find out, I want to know more. I'm at it, I'm at it, I'm at it. And it's very easy to get drawn in like that. But the problem is, the more you do that, the more illuminated you become and become a target. And then they're watching and then they're keeping an eye on you. And you watch this guy because we don't like what he's doing. And eventually you'll get a slap on the hand and you reel it back a bit. Like a naughty child goes to the corner of the room. Eventually we end up creeping back out and doing a little bits. But we duck down, we make sure, okay, let's not try and get, don't draw their attention too often. And it's smaller steps, unfortunately. It is. At first, you're running, but the more nearer to the truth you get, the slower it goes. And that's because you've got to be cautious about it. And it is problematic because you don't want to, honestly, it's really bad. It's really bad. And we even as simply as writing a bloody book and a certain chapter, can we get this chapter done? We know what's in it. We know it's going to catch the eye. We've got to get it in there. But then we just about put pen to paper. All hell breaks loose. Car just broke down. Family members just died. There'll be something that draws us away from being able to produce what we want to produce. And you think to yourself, and you learn to realize what the hell's going on here? It's like somehow reality being manipulated here to steer us away from what, I mean, it's just, and it's too often. And it's not just me, it's others that have been in that point at that moment when they think, oh, I'm right, almost there. And all of a sudden, boulder falls and they're drawn straight away from it. And they don't go back to that book for another year or 6 months or whatever. And then there'll be something else. So, it's very, very tricky, very difficult to deal with.
it is. I've experienced that many times too, my friend, where I was doing research on was it Mesopotamian magic, and I get an email, two emails from two different experiencers, didn't like me or my research. Both of them said that my guides, of course they're guides, right? They have to be. My guides want you to know that they'll be waiting for you when you die.
Oh, yes.
I was like, that's cute.
It is.
Excuse me. I'm out. I'm out. I went to Rhode Island for a week and just ate a bunch of Italian food. I'll be honest with you. I was like, okay, I'm out. But like you said, it does, and it just to me, it does point to some kind of construct, not just that we're researching the phenomenon, but if we get too close to the truth, there's the protective mechanism, right? Where you're seeing what shouldn't be seen, and we're just going to kind of slap you a little bit. That's where the real research is being done. Unfortunately, it's the most expensive and problematic. And I've experienced that just recently, right? Like totaled my parents' car. The individual had no license, no insurance. And I'm telling you, in my opinion, it's because I was delving into some research that I shouldn't have, and now I'm pulling back. And we have
They
to
stop
survive
they stop you in the most obscure manners.
out
But
of
when
nowhere.
you often, then you realize, and then it realizes you realize, and they go, I have to approach this in a different way. That's so
Mhm.
clever, and that's the problem that we have, Marcus, all the time trying to deal with this. Like I say, 2 steps forward, 1 step back with caution.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds exactly that. I mean, I just want to pick back up on what you were talking about, Nathan, there as well, about there's a price to pay for the information, there's a price to pay for the knowledge, how these things draw you in. Now, I don't know if this is going to connect to what we've been speaking here, but I certainly want to bring it up. Alistair Crowley and his experiments into communicating with
Yep.
otherworldly entities. I think you know where I'm going to go with this. The famous one is with Lamb. Now, again, I understand this to a degree, but I also understand that it's a little bit more nuanced again than how most people understand it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And was Crowley interfacing with the phenomenon when he was doing those experiments? I think it was in New York in the 40s, I believe.
Yeah,
Oh, there's 2 main occasions actually.
absolutely. Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, not just one, brother. Many.
Uh,
Yeah, so initially as an Enochian entity, but as always, right, Crowley's trying to get deeper and deeper and deeper, even to the point where at his home, his rituals, even in daytime, the darkness would like literally just pour into his room, and he'd have to light candles daytime. Weird, weird. But yeah, so a lot of this is tied, unfortunately, to occult practices. And it's not my imagination. Like people, when they hear me lecture, it's not all Nathaniel. It's like, no, it happened. When John Dee and Edward Kelly were performing their rituals, they had balls of light with little men flying around looking at them. The skull experiment, the same thing. And so even with Jack Parsons, what we're looking at, if we're looking in terms of like the characteristics of some of these entities, is initiates. Something that knows how to work the occult in ways that we don't. The case study I had, I think Steve had something similar to this too, where it was a remote viewer that was going in and out of his body and meeting with his quote guides. But when he met with them, it was just like a UFO abduction account where they're in a metallic room and he's interfacing with them. And it got to a point where it's just like Albert Bender, where, yeah, the mask is pulled off and you're looking at something you didn't even know existed and it transcends all microcosms of reality. And so that's what happened. They weren't his guides. It wasn't a UFO abduction. But when he got put back into his body, biosigilization occurred from underneath the surface of the skin, 3 amulets. They were interreligious, and there was an overarching Egyptian hieroglyphic.
Yeah.
Now, you want to go tour with those bad boys? Absolutely not. And that's where I'm at. I'm like, yeah, but that's what we're dealing with is something that knows how to manipulate reality. And then when you get too close to it, boom.
Exactly. Yeah, it alters. I mean, the thing is, you got to consider, when we conducted experiments in 2014, SEP, Scientific Establishment of Parapsychology, conducted a series of investigations and interviews with people who said they had long established spirit guides. Now, the problem is the whole mechanism of the spirit guide is attachment. That's all it is. Simple and straight, it's attachment. And we proved it so because when we discussed and interviewed them, we said, okay, so have you willingly accepted the fact that this is a person that used to live, was a person once? Oh, yeah, yeah, And everybody got told that, oh, yes, my spirit guide was this person, or my spirit guide was this person, and he worked here, and he lived here, and da da da. Okay, so when we conducted the research on all 20 of the most significant incidents we got, every single one of them had lied. All spirit guides. Not one of them existed as a human being. He never worked where they worked, never lived where they lived, you know. And this is the attachment side. When afterwards, and we asked them, will you now please approach your spirit guide and ask them, why did they tell you inaccurate information? Not true. And we asked them and we waited for responses to come back from them. And we got responses back because they weren't communicating with them. But all of them came up with the same thing. And I thought, well, how can all of them, apparently all various different spirits, guys from various places of the world and different beliefs, all came back with the one-liners, and that was basically is that do you want to continue asking questions or do you want to keep the communications going? And every single one of
Ooh.
them said, I want to keep the communications going. So they knew not to press. And it happened with, and it was exactly the same response with all 20 of them. And it was like, that's a mechanism at play there, defense mechanism.
Yes.
Hey, the defense mechanism kicked in, delivered the information, and it knew that all of these 20 people were already attached and that they were going to turn around and say, "Oh no, I won't pry and ask any more questions. Please don't go away." You with me? And this is how it works. It's an attachment process. And it's very cleverly done. And when you mentioned earlier, Marcus, about gifting,
Hmm.
even in the latest, in the most recent stuff, we're talking about, crash sites, UAP crash sites. In the higher circles, they are referred to as gifting fields. And that was not our terminology. That's their
Mm.
terminology, because we're being gifted or rewarded for one thing or another. And we are rewarded in technology. And not just our country, in many other countries. We're all at it. We've all got all doing the same thing and all doing, the secret stuff. But at the end of the day, they know there's reward in the effort they put in. So it comes in many shapes and sizes, gifting, not just the interpersonal relationship you might have with some of these things, but also on a grander scale for whole countries might be able to profit from technological advancements because of gifting. So, it's like, if you do enough for me, I'll throw you the odd thing now and again. And that's what we're doing. We're like begging dogs waiting for the next chicken bone. And that's the way it seems.
Steve, I'll tell you what, to your point, brother, it's reminiscent of Richard Banderick, who used to work for, I think it was Skunk Works and Lockheed Martin. He owns his own aerospace company now, but he did an interview recently, and he was talking about 40 years ago working for the US government, going to these gifting fields. And what he said blew my mind because it fits right into our research. And I haven't heard it talked about by many people, if any. But anyways, in this interview, he said that they were going out to the gifting field, and he said that they were collecting metamaterial that was self-assembling. And he said that they would hold it in their hands, and within 10 seconds, if it did not align with you, it would deconstruct into some kind of powder or dust. Now, the people that know what the phenomenon's doing are now taking that and placing it in the hands of experiencers and saying, what can you do with this?
Exactly.
So, right, what it implies, the implications are at least, is that not all of these gifts or giftings are for us. Therefore, who the phenomenon has handpicked.
Yeah.
And dare I say, and here's the big kicker, that some of these are in fact practitioners. And so what it's doing is, here you go. And the population's like, oh my God, this is so cool. We've got this. And it's like, no, it's not for you. You know what it's for? It's for Parsons. And I
Yeah.
believe there are others like that. It's for a Crowley, and there are others like that. And what the phenomenon is due. Again, here you go.
Yeah.
And at the end of the interview, Richard Banderick said this, it's incredible. He said, our conclusion was that there is something trying to manipulate our species.
We should probably get close to wrapping this up. But still a few more things I want to look at. I mean, Nathan, it seems to me that the power of this phenomenon almost lies in its ability to manipulate, but to manipulate from the sidelines. It reminds me of a saying, the biggest trick the devil ever played was convincing people it didn't exist, that kind of thing. Do you ever, more and more people are obviously becoming more and more aware of this phenomena, the potential of this phenomena. Do you think as more and more people do become aware, it might lose its power? It might need to take some kind of more overt control as opposed to ruling from the sidelines?
Well, I think that it depends on what they are aware of about the phenomenon. And it goes back to my point where if the narrative can be controlled, if they can control the question, they control the answer. And that's what we're seeing. We cannot, and I'm just going to be very transparent, we cannot commercialize malevolence, and they will not let us. And so the propaganda being given to the masses about the phenomenon will continue being given. And we have to be ready for that. It's like people don't want religion to be a part of this,
No,
right? But it
Mm.
is.
Mm.
It is.
it really
And
is.
yeah, and so I think that conversations like this will kind of help people see beyond the veil. But people need to understand that the people that are doing the kind of work we're doing, literally, it's on the knife's edge. Get a little bit, leave, get a little bit, leave. And then later on, we come back and try to put the pieces together for everybody. It's okay, this is what it's kind of looking at. But do I believe the phenomenon will just let us, just here you go, you have everything you want? No, not at all. And again, it gets back to, what will the population be aware of about the phenomenon? I don't believe that the phenomenon will let them see too much, right? You won't see this. I'm just going to be very honest. You won't see these at a lot of conferences. You won't see them on a lot of TV shows. You won't see it a lot of conversations on the internet because and it's not just that people don't know about it. The phenomenon doesn't want them to know about it. The phenomenon just wants to go around doing exactly what it's always done, and it's been highly successful. Look at what it's done.
Very
It's
clever.
decontextualized hybridism from history. Don't look over there. Now we're defining that. It's decontextualized altars from religion. Yeah, that's not now it's NHI. It's a completely different phenomenon. It's now come out with CE5, where it's now self-initiated contact. And I've been telling people in my interviews, no, the initiation was when you had a thought to go observe the phenomenon. That's not self-initiated. That initiation, that's literally the phenomenon baiting your gaze as an observer. Come help me incarnate an archetype. So you can go tell everybody that it was you. But who made you look that way?
Mm.
Exactly.
The
That's
phenomenon did.
right back it starts.
Yeah, right.
Just
And so
know
people,
the influence. I wrote a book actually on it. It's actually called The Influence, the book. There is the influence, and we can ignore that because
yeah,
when you really look into things, you have to question, who is at the steering wheel regarding, your sudden thought that pops into your head. Oh, let's go and
oh
do
yeah,
that. Sometimes there's a reason why that comes and where it comes from. And if it serves them, because they look, we know the power of belief. It's a very important, very interesting thing that works. We know the power of belief is very powerful. But if you can divert that, what you might think is belief in the right direction, and steer it in my direction and fill up my cup, thank you very much. That's what they're going to
yeah,
do.
man.
Yeah, I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. It really, really is. Just going back to, you know, how do I word this? The phenomenon itself. I mean, essentially, what is it? I mean, I know you can't really answer that. I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this. Okay, so
Yeah.
what is it? Is it, is it like an entity? Is it an energy? Is it a being? I've also read speculation that it's the universe itself manifesting around us, that we are the universe, all that type of thought patterns. What do you think it is? Nathan, go with you first.
Oh, it could be an entity if it wants to be.
What do you think at its core?
Right?
At its
It could
core,
be anything it wants to be. I'm sorry, go ahead.
at its core, what do you think it is?
Mhm.
Is it just an energy? Is it is it actually a thing as we would understand it?
Oh, a program of some sort, right?
We're not conditioned to understand it. We're
Yeah,
welcome.
that's what I mean. Yeah.
We don't have the capacity to even begin to understand this because it's areas that we can't even comprehend. I mean, we're talking about something that has probably got godly power. So what's God? Well, we don't know. Did it was and then we get into very tricky areas. And is that well, when did God finish and when did phenomena start? Or is it amalgamated? Or has it always been them? And we've disillusioned about the manipulation about all these godly things that people may have had or may not have had that we might read in Bibles and other scriptures, is it just, the same phenomena, but presenting itself in a new way, and we'll call it angels. I mean, to be honest, there wasn't much of angels around before, Ezekiel. But the problem is with this sort of thing is that anything goes. But what we do know is that it's hyper intelligent, and we do know there is a mechanism. There's mathematics involved. There's counterplays involved. There's a system to back up a system. And there are countermeasures in there ready and waiting to be flashing lights, alerts, because when it does, this happens. That's been designed. This this happens, it's been designed if this flashes. And that
Mm,
comes in and takes over the situation. So you know that they thought it out very, very well to how to protect everything, to protect the secret, protect everything, right from day one, right from the start. So what is that? I mean, I don't know. Is that God? Is that are we dealing with God? Is God the phenomena? It's horrible to say sometimes because people have all some sort of formal religious beliefs, but how true does that go back? Well, we can. This phenomenon precedes religion. It really does. So, where's all the religions come from? Where the different beliefs and stuff? As they've altered over the years, of course, to fit better societies as more modern times. I wouldn't be surprised over the next 30, 40 years, we might have another Bible come along, because it's got to fit to more modern society. However, it shouldn't do. If it's the truth, it's the truth. We shouldn't have variation, and we do have variations, and that's a problem. So, what we don't have in variation. Phenomena is always doing the same thing. The
there
vast,
we
the
go.
mass changes, but the source, whatever the source is, just like these AI systems, for 3 years, plowed with all this information in the CRS system, tried to work out what is all this phenomena, thinking reams and reams of information are going to come out on the day they press that button. Please tell me. It was literally 2 sentences. They were shocked. 2 sentences. The first sentence says basically that the phenomena is capable of physiological constructs, just as Nathan said. Physio- and physiological construct, the chairs, table, everything. So what's that say? It's saying, well, it can create reality because that's what it means, a physiological
Yeah.
construct. Second part was it saw so much interconnection between all of it. It said there is a source. It doesn't know what the source is, but the source is responsible for all. So is that God? I don't know. We can't answer that question because it's so beyond our understanding, But what we can say is very clever, manipulated, very clever system is being employed here. And it's all about us. It's all about keeping us where they want us and us doing what they want in multiple different ways. Sometimes we get rewarded as we're going through time, we are advancing, not in the right ways, unfortunately, sometimes in the wrong ways, but we're doing what they want us to do. We are simply putty in their hands, and I can't see how we're always going to get a head start or get some understanding because if they tell us, you can guarantee that most of that might be deceptive. It's just like watching the news these days. There's more disinformation than there is information, and they
There
do
we
it on
go.
purpose. Some good nuggets, some probable truths, but mixed in with so many lies and deception that you'll never make an understand. And that's what this phenomenon wants to do. It wants to deliver absurdity and confusion, and that's how it wins.
Yeah, I mean, listening
I
to that,
agree.
I mean, one more final thought I'd like to get. We were talking about is it God? Everything's designed. We're almost drifting into creationism, not necessarily how we might understand creationism, but
Mhm.
creationism nonetheless. So it's almost as if we're dealing with reality itself. I mean,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts before we kind of wrap this up? What are your thoughts on that? And again, I'd like to go up to both of you, but Nathan, what are your thoughts on that first of all?
Either reality or the construct of reality.
Right.
And if anything, and this is, I think that's what happens when we get too close to some of the falsified information and narratives and the constructs, is we start looking at this and saying, okay, yeah, this doesn't seem real. That's a mask. This is an incarnation. That's an archetype. And once you pull back all of it, you start looking in, that's when you're hit. Get out of here. You're not supposed to see that. And so it's the protective mechanism. And but I think, it's so fascinating too, because there's like a program employed,
Yes.
right? We talk about that, Stephen England, right? There's some kind of a program employed. And I've noticed that with experiencers, where there's one experiencer I know who was abducted by aliens, but he was also working with guides. And so he suffered a really sinister abduction encounter, but went back to his guides, and his guides were not there. What the phenomenon did, right, was implemented a new program. Yeah. We're still in your life, but we're not guides anymore. We're this. And then I've even had other cases where they'll go back to the guides and say, listen, I need some help about what these things did to me. And the guides start to kind of, again, recontextualize it. Well, they did it for you. Or here's another one that's laughable. You agreed to this. Don't you remember that? Before you were born, you agreed to suffer all of these burns. And so you have, again, it seems like the phenomenon's diversifying its identity, where it's not either or, it's both. And depending on what mood it's in or whoever you want it to be, that I'll be that. It's like a whole program, right? And so, yeah, it does suggest that it is a singularity and the source at the same time. And you start to see beyond all these veils. But once you do, you'll never unsee it. And I could say this by experience, once you do, you'll never be able to do the kind of research you've always done. Everything is over. You start from scratch, and it's like, okay, don't tell me who you are. I want to know what you're doing. That's where I'm at.
You got to always consider if we ever gain enough advantage, to be able to conclude that we figure all this out. By then, it would have rebooted and produced a
Yep.
new program. Really would. We will
So,
always be more than an arm reach away from this. Always. Can't imagine how, because we're not at the steering wheel. We live in their domain, in a sense of speaking, of manipulation. And we have to, even there's plenty of evidence for the source. I mean, we've had conversations finished during paranormal investigations, which was linked to NHI questions during the UFO investigations. So whatever the entities we were talking about there were the same things we're talking about there. So it's the same bunch of people, same bunch of
mhm.
guys, same source, and you think, well, this is why we shouldn't have compartmentalization between these subjects. Maybe it was there, put there for a reason, so that we don't connect the dots and that we can stay in these stupid narratives that, oh, it's ETs flying to Earth from other places like planets. I mean, they don't want you to know and put those dots together. So the easiest way is to confuse you with compartmentalization. And it worked for a long time. It really did. Nobody would deal with each other. And you couldn't find conclusive data because the conclusive data wasn't in your camp. It was in that camp over there. And you
There we
weren't
go.
working in that camp. And that's the biggest problem. Diversity. Split them. We know how to do it. Split them by diversity. That's the way you in it attack. And it's a very clever process, psychological process. And that's what they do. They use our stuff against us in many, many occasions. But you know what? There's definitely evidence for the source. Absolutely. And there's so many interconnections. Problem is, though, as we move forward and we might gain new data, new experiments, new things, and you think, okay, but once you come to the conclusion that we've reached, okay, we still come to the question is, who are they? What is it? Or is it an it? Is it them? Do we ever see the true face of the phenomena, or are all these faces of various phenomena produced by it? So, and that's the problem we lie with today. But it is an interesting journey, and you do get to learn things. Most people would have stepped off this bus a long time ago. They want to stay comfortable with the it's an alien abduction, or the traveling here from space, or it's a general haunting, or it's a poltergeist case because of a little girl who's 9 years old who's actually I mean, honest to God,
Yeah.
and it's shameful that that we've been stuck in this, but the system has been devised for us to be stuck in this. But we are taking some leaps forward now, big leaps. Not everybody's going to be able to. It's a big pill to digest. I get it, and there's a lot of sleepless nights sometimes when you get involved in this. But at the end of the day, it's the truth. It's the truth. It doesn't matter how shocking it is. It will reveal the ultimate thing, and that is, it is what it is at the end of the day. So fascinating.
Yeah, it really is absolutely fascinating. I mean, one thing I'll end on there is it reminds me. I'm a big. Is this something for another episode? But I'm a big not believer, but I'm a big fan of people who point out little hidden messages, like in films or stories or fairy tales, and it this all reminds me kind of like the Wizard of Oz, where you've got the guy behind the shield, manipulating what people are seeing. He's not really this big god. He's just this, and it kind of reminds me of that. I mean, Stephen, if you've got any thoughts on that before we sign off.
The wizard was behind the veil, the curtain veil. It's very symbolistic in a sense of speaking. Yeah. And it was a whole charade, and it was all a dream at the end of the dream, but then it was a dream that was real, and and the whole thing is very interesting. you know, because you can take aspects of all areas of that film and put it into real day experiences, you know. But you know, I've experienced things that defies reality, and you would not find, no matter what science you deal with, there is nothing that could explain some of this stuff. So if we are dealt with something like that, which doesn't even fall into our realm of understanding, then we've got a fair way to go yet. Unfortunately, but we're chipping away at the block, aren't we, Nate? You know, we're chipping away at
We're
the block.
trying, brother. We're trying. It's John Klein talking to Indrid Cold in Mothman Prophecies,
I'm,
right?
I'm
What a profundity, right? He's like, okay, what do you look like, Indrid? It depends on who's looking, John.
Exactly.
I think that's been an absolutely fascinating show. Some of the stuff we've been discussing there, and I'm sure, Nathan, that your research is just going to unfold and unfold. What have you got upcoming? You know, I know you've got the Skin That Crawls that you released. That what other projects have you got in the pipeline? What research ways that's taking? The floor is yours, my friend.
Uh, my second project is going to be called An Unction Unclean, where I'm going to dive into demonology and kind of deconstruct that archetype. It's going to be unique. People are going to love that, right? Especially like, oh, Nathan, thanks, buddy, you know. Um, right? Because anyways, other than that, I'm honestly I'm doing a few more interviews, and that's going to be the last of my series of interviews for the year. I'm going to take the rest of the year off, other than my meetings with a new mentor of mine who I'm like super, 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 super excited, and I bragged about to my whole family. Um, and but anyways, other than that, I'm taking a back seat. It's been a wild ride for the last few months, and there are other projects that I'm working on with other people, but that's going to be like actually filming interviews and stuff. But that's what I have going on, guys. But thank you so much for having me on. I enjoyed myself, and we got into some really meaty truths today.
Yeah, you were absolutely
We
fantastic,
did.
and I feel quite privileged that we were one of the last interviews you did before you took a bit of time off, Nathan. So thank you ever so much for joining us, Steve. Before we sign off, great show.
Yeah, I knew it would be. It always is. The truth is always interesting. It's for those who can digest it, of course.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know.
absolutely fantastic, Nathan.
And you don't have
Thank
to
you
take
ever
our
so
word.
much.
Do that research yourselves. You can go out there and start digging. But when you do, just be prepared to look under the stones. And if you don't like it, don't look. But sometimes it will take you into places where it's going to bring you to some sort of conclusion, same conclusions that we're reaching and others. So, fascinating show. Love the subject. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the subject too, and obviously, make sure you let us know what you think in the comments. Make sure you follow us on social media and check out the Anomaly Project Podcast.com for articles, news, and updates. Until next time, goodbye and take care.